Well, hi everyone. This is Felton Thomas, and welcome to our open community meeting for DPLA. We thought about the idea of doing an icebreaker. I'm not sure, John, how many folks do we have?
We have 19 and 21 and 23. That's probably once we get over 20, it's probably too many to
Yeah,
do
so
a
that's a
real
little much.
icebreaker, right?
I think
And
it would
and
take
we
me a long time to allow everyone to talk too, so next
yeah. So we will just kind of go ahead and move forward with the meeting today and we can power through it. So this may not be as long as usually would meet because we've got some announcements, but not a lot of details to go along with those announcements. So I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, Mr. John Bracken, and he's going to lead us through this meeting.
All right, all right. And I am just clicking over. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy summer. I also want to say hi to Marcia from the board who's here. And I'm looking to see if any other board members are here yet. I do want to see, so the DPLA staff who are in the room, can you guys wave in the comment section? A lot of you are here. Lynn Westbrooks from the board is also here. So I just want to give a little bit of sense of who's in the room so folks know from the DPLA point of view. As Felton said, I wanted to use this opportunity of the first, we're at day 10 of the DPLA fiscal year, just to give a broad update of where we are. I think the last time I really gave an organizational update was probably at the beginning of the year in January. And I just lost my slide. As Felton alluded to, there's a lot happening. I think the headline is we feel pretty excited about what's coming together. I shared a preview of this conversation with our network council folk last week. So I see some of you here, and hopefully this will build off of that. And I guess the subheadline is Felton is saying we've got some exciting news to share that's not quite ready for prime time yet, but I will allude to it as we go through. But first, before we kind of get to what's coming next, I kind of wanted to do a rear view mirror and just kind of remind folks what our pathway has been to get here, right? I mean, we're lucky enough to, we're young enough that we can look back and tell the story of how we've got here. Then I'll talk about where we are and what the team in particular has been working on this year and it's teed up for the summer and the fall. And then some thoughts about where we're headed, which is really the, unwritten yet. And so that's really where I want to help plant some seeds for future conversations, both with the board and with the others of you who have been so core to this work. So where we've been, just as a reminder, and I know some of you were here at the launch, and many of you were not. And Bob Darton, who may or may not be in the room today, because I saw him RSVP for this meeting, don't see him yet. One of our founders helped kick us off in 2011 with an essay calling for a national digital library to make the bulk of literature available to all, and put out this really ambitious goal, it turns out, right, to digitize all the books in the public domain, as many as can be cleared. So that was part of a seed. If you remember back to 2011, it was the era of the beginning, the coming together, the Google Book Project. There was a lot of discussions, both inside of the field and outside of the field, about what it means to move to a digital information and digital access. There was another, moment broadly. There was this optimism about where we were as a nation, as a world, and how technology could help us be in community with folks near and far, right? If you remember the excitement of the Arab Spring, that was a very tangible moment across the world about the excitement of digital tools for people power, for bringing people together, for tearing down dictatorships. I remember being at a press award event where Twitter received the award for being a champion of free speech and democracy across the world. right? That was part of the atmosphere in which we were born. And around that time as well, another one of our founders, John Palfrey, published a book called Bibliotech, where he really put out some challenges for the field, right? He talked about the risks if we don't take on asking hard questions. He talked about the need for unpleasant trade-offs that that was really going to force us as a field to think critically about what we keep doing and what we stop doing. Talked about how do you drive these so much interesting ideas and experimentation that a lot of you have been involved with. A lot, often was happening at the margins of our organizations, not at the core. And this notion of becoming networked institutions. And that in particular, I think, is part of both the challenge and the opportunity for DPLA that we've aspired to, but probably never fully lived up to, right? What does it mean to be a networked institution in our space? All those conversations and all those threads culminated in the launch of DPLA and the grounding of our mission statement, right? To maximize access, right? And in particular, I think one aspect of this that resonates for me is it was a desire to maximize access in a way that we weren't going backwards in terms of our ability to share and create and be able to reach information. And we knew that left to its own devices, the market left to its own devices, capitalism left to its own devices, there was a real danger of these tools, these digital tools that were so exciting, but also to lead to constrictions of knowledge. And I think we've seen lots of examples of that, unfortunately. And our mission has been, how do we use those tools for good to maximize access? So a little bit of a snapshot of where we've been over the last few years. And here's where we are now. Many of you were involved with this in a strategic planning process that we kicked off in 2018 and included 2019, where we doubled down on the access goal, right, on the need for access. And we centered our work around 3 areas. Making cultural riches of our libraries and archives available to all, building a library-controlled platform to deliver ebooks to readers, and becoming a convening point and convener for the field and others to explore the possibilities of these tools for growing into the future, right? With that in a ways that would impact information access for our communities. So that is the plan that we launched about 4 years ago. One of the things we baked into that, after getting feedback from some of you who are on this call too about 3 intentional processes, was we created 3 what we called approaches. So 3 ways we were going to go about doing this work. One was to collaborate, right, in a proactive way. Another was to be clear that we are optimistic. We believe that these tools can result in stronger communities, more informed humans, and better processes for doing our work. And the third is we put a commitment down that, in an acknowledgement that projects like ours and our project itself, we're not born fully grounded in the reality of how our institutions were created, right? And legacies of repression and white supremacy were baked into a lot of the institutions that led to our creation. And if we were going to be forces for good and for liberation, we need to own that and think critically about how we do all of our work in such a way that we take that on. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've tried, with varying degrees of success, frankly, to take that on in particular. But those are the 3 approaches that we adopted to that work that we launched 4 years ago. So what does this work mean? What does this actually look like? And here are a couple of entities of ways we took that on. And now hang on one second. So one, we build code right? And with our partners, for our partners, one of the pragmatic ways we've done that is through local sites for folks that many of you, we work with some of you on. The second ties to that third approach I mentioned, which is the digital equity project that we launched about a year ago that some of you have heard updates on this summer. I think we have one more update coming in from one of the 3 initial projects that we launched as a partnership with Recollection Wisconsin and the University of Wisconsin at Milwaukee, Seattle Public Library, and Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, where we, working with the support of Mellon Foundation, intentionally try to design projects where we are working with communities and collecting stories from Black and Brown and Indigenous communities in particular. And so I think with her magic thumb, Kat, who's on the line, might be able to point to links to some of the events we've had that in this summer kind of highlighting the early insights from that work. The other area where we have seen desire and pickup is around working groups, so specific kind of with our partners. And most of you that are here, I think, have been involved actively with one of our half a dozen or so working groups where I think we've both created community, but also practical ways to come together around our work. The Wikimedia Commons and creating a pipeline between the Wikimedia Commons and ultimately Wikipedia and other types of platforms and open services, and the photographs and museums and documents and all the access and openly available information, openly licensed information, building a pipeline for that. And that's involved a lot of work. And Dominic's name just popped up on my screen. So Dominic Bird McDevitt's been leading that work for us with support from Sloan Foundation in partnership with many of you and Wikimedia Foundation. And that's both technical and sort of social, creating a variety of different and legal, right? And creating building off of things like the right statements work we've done. The second core pillar of our work is building out a ebook program by and for libraries. That's manifested itself in the Palace Project, which is a collaboration that we kicked off in a new format, I guess, 2 or 3 years ago, during the pandemic with our partners at Lyricist. The main activity we've taken on in that is maintaining the Palace Marketplace. So a mechanism, a platform for the distribution of titles into libraries, to make accessible to libraries, ultimately to readers. I think the other area where we've built muscles and made an impact is around licensing models and experimentation, and not just taking the licensing models that existed, but really trying to push innovation in how ebooks are accessed by libraries and by readers. And we've done a lot of work around open access publishing, both in terms of things in the public domain that have come into the public domain, but also, we've experimented with creating on our own out of public documents ebooks. And I guess I'll preview, and I don't know if we have a link to share yet, but one example of that is we took the decisions, all of the decisions that came out of the Supreme Court ruling effectively ending affirmative action last month, or was it this month? And we're turning that into an EPUB that's going to be available for free download for everyone, a high quality EPUB. And that will be live probably in the next couple of days. That's some of the experiment we've done around open access publishing. And the last bit has been exploring technologies to empower communities. That last bit of kind of really trying to be a bridge between new tools and new approaches to leveraging tools and our community work in our community. And so we've done things like a series of book talks. The next one is with Jennifer Palka and her new book in 2 weeks. I think it's July 24th or 25th, and I'm guessing our DJ in the chat room, Kat, will throw a link up to that book. We've done probably over a dozen of those over the last, maybe closer to 2 dozen over the last few months, couple years. We've also done, working with Michael Blackwell of Readers First and COSLA, a set of webinars called, and in-person events called that we call Collaborating for Access, which is about presenting and new ideas and approaches around, especially around access to ebook, in ways that they're practically serviceable. And we think that partnering with the community that Readers First has helped convene for our space, when with publishers thinking about ebooks, and with COSLA, which is the Association of State Librarians, is a really powerful combination of communities coming together. And we've tried to, create opportunities for community, right? Just for conversations like this. And during the pandemic, when we were all trying to find ways to hang out and come together, did things like, webinar happy hours and thinking about how we can drive that back into real-time conversations. And I think this is the last one example is, for the last few years, we've been collaborating with the Knight Foundation on their annual gathering of library leaders, mostly public library CEOs and largely from the communities that they care about. But we've been using that as an opportunity to help set an agenda for practical, pragmatic conversations about emergent tools and approaches, right? So for instance, we've used that as a forum to talk about the ebooks work. We've used it as a forum to talk about the digital equity work, and in particular, how do we leverage and think about using archival materials in physical public library branches in such a way to add to the community engagement that public libraries are doing, things like that. And we're beginning to have conversations about the 2024 version of that meeting soon, and several of you have been part of that. So I am gonna take a breath for a second and take a sip of water as we begin to shift to, like, what are we doing now? Here are the priorities we have. And this is a revised articulation of our priorities now that we're halfway through our 2023 year. One is to support the ongoing aggregation work that I described, that really makes up the bulk of that first area of work that we talked about. And in particular, we're in the mode of building out this notion of tech debt is something that comes up a lot. That last word is et cetera. But really taking on, tying up a lot of kind of core services that need to be strengthened and improved, things like security and tech debt. And I think if my colleague Scott Williams is here, he can speak to that more when he gets here. The digital equity project, which I touched on, is something that we're, is an ongoing effort of ours. The Wikimedia work, which I touched on, is an ongoing effort of ours. And both those are grant-supported projects that are, from Mellon Foundation and Sloan Foundation, respectively, that allow us to do that work. And another area to touch on is counteracting book bans. So, I think we as a team, and through conversations with a lot of you, board members and others, when the book banning onslaught really kicked into gear a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we spent a lot of time thinking about and listening about how we as a digital national platform could leverage the digital part and the national part of what we do to be an asset and an ally for our partners and our communities who are under onslaught, right? And as we reflected on that as a team, our point of view as a staff was, these book bans are not happening in the abstract, right? They're part of an intentional political pushback in many respects that are about restricting and pushing back against the progress and a lot of the real progress that has been made in the streets in the last few years around Black and brown rights and LGBTQIA plus rights, right? And the fact that so many of these authors of the work that were being targeted were either queer or Black or brown, or the most vociferous fans were often Black queer folks, that we knew that that was part of the project that was happening, and that as part of our efforts to live our values of justice and liberation, it's important for us to think about, to be in a practical way, think about ways we could be an asset and ally on that. And I say all that, not having a thing to announce, but we are in the early stages of rolling out a project that will make ebooks more accessible, that we leverage some of the digital tools around ebooks that I mentioned in such a way to make books that have been banned more readily available to folks. And I can share more. And then the last bit, which is something that's really just kind of coalesced in the last few weeks and months, partly again through conversations with many of you, is a notion of a broad visioning process. And this is something that we're, is under development. I will say it's something that in varying degrees, the staff, a lot of our stakeholders and our board have been asking for. And going to the announcement that Felton alluded to, we now have a funding commitment that's going to allow us to take up this work in a broad way. That funding commitment just came in last month. And so we're still in the process of designing what that process is going to be, look like, the who, what, where, why, when in terms of timelines. But I'm really excited that we're going to get to kick that off. I can talk a little bit about it, about what we do know right now. So again, our last plan was in 2019, which was a strategic plan, was a very practical, which I talked about the outputs of, but it was really, where should DPLA be orienting itself? I think part of the opportunity that we've perceived this year in having conversations with folks is 2023 is a very different space than when we started. And because we have the funding opportunity, we have a moment, and because we're coming out of the pandemic, and because we're having these sets of very critical conversations about, what it means to be American, what it means to be human in an age of AI. I feel like those are broad, pretty abstract questions, but we as a field have an opportunity to be part of and inform those conversations. And my hope is that we can leverage this process, this opportunity, to help for the field, help put some of those questions on the table. What are the opportunities and needs that the field has where we could help be appreciative of where we are in 2023? And I guess the other footnote I'll add, not to speak for the board, but to speak for the board, is I think that there's a comfort level that as a digital public library of America, we have not just the opportunity, but the mandate to really think broadly about what's coming next and build toward that. And really kind of harken back to the spirit that led to our formation circa 2011, 2012, right? When we were thinking about what were the gaps in the field. We know we want it to be a participatory process. This is not an example of, where 9 board members will go into a conference room and come out with a plan. So that part of the designing that we're doing right now is figuring out what that process can and would and how it will unfold, and then what the output will be. And I think as I'm talking to folks about it, I imagine, a dual output, one that's sort of broad, what are the opportunities and gaps in the field that we really, all of us should be thinking about and could take on. And then more pragmatically, what should we as DPLA be doing, right? Where do we leverage DPLA to take that on? And again, it feels like it's both an opportunity, but also I'm extra appreciative of the privilege we have as a small independent organization with a set of really core strategic thinking stakeholders to be able to think broadly about what the opportunities are. So broad visioning to identify field opportunities, right? And how we're taking on those challenges, and also a plan for how DPLA can address those. So that, we had a team meeting today at this is about the extent of what we know right now. There's still a lot to fill out. We're hoping to be able to roll out, a process and a timeline and ways for people to engage soon. But that's, as Felton suggested, that coming down the pike. And that's the big part of our task for this summer, is to lock in that process. And that is the end of my presentation. And Felton, your name is on here. I'm going to stop my sharing. And happy, hand the mic back over to you, Felton, and dive in and take on any conversations from board members or other folks.
Thanks, John. I think that was a great overview. And I think it's an opportunity for us to hear from folks in the network or folks who have joined us and our board to respond and give us some feedback to where we've been and where we are now and where we're hoping to go with the visioning process. So why don't we just open it up? If anyone has anything they'd like to say, you could raise your hand or throw it in the chat, and we'll go from there.
I think because Kat can specify, I think folks may need to throw it in the chat because folks may not have a microphone, but that's more than Kat can answer and help figure that out.
Sure, if anyone wants to speak, I mean, the chat works, but you can also just raise your hand and then I can allow you to talk with the click of a button. So just raise your hand and I'll do that.
Joe and Elaine and any of the other board members who may have anything you might want to offer while we're waiting for questions.
I see Bob Barton raised his hand. Bob, I don't think you were in the room where I showed the slide quoting your opening letter from 2011, but I did. And so, Bob, as DPLA founder, welcome. And the microphone is yours. It's so good to see you. If the microphone works.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. John, I just wanted to mention again something I sent you an email about a while ago, and that is this extraordinary collection we have at Harvard of the digitized manuscripts from the beginning of the settlement here in North America through the American Revolution. We have about 600,000 documents. They are incredibly rich. They tell the story of the origin of higher education in this country and lots of other stories as well. My point is that all of this is available in open access. And since you did mention the need for public libraries to have access to archival collections, I would just like to repeat that Harvard can help you create some kind of link so that people all over the country can draw on this very rich archival source.
Yes, thank you. And that's, thanks for reminding me of that. I'm going to reconnect with Suzanne, who I don't think is here, Wones, and connect with Shanae and pick up that discussion. I think that's a great opportunity. And I think you're right. That's exactly in line with, with what brought us to the table, 10, 12, 13 years ago. And I will layer on top of it. I mean, one of the exciting things where, and if she hasn't, Kat can throw some links into it, that we've been doing is ensuring that collections like that, we can build connections into the Wikimedia Commons, which creates a whole other potential avenue for materials like that to be seen and to be used. But I just started, while you were talking, I started drafting an email to pick up that conversation. So thanks for thinking of that and pushing up that opportunity.
Good, thank you.
Anyone else have a question to ask or any thoughts or concerns?
I'm gonna just, partly because, he's been part of the seed and partly because he's the first face in my thing. It's just, if Joe, is there anything you want to say about what you perceived as sort of the needs and opportunities from the sort of network opportunity? Because part of the seed for this visioning conversation in part came from conversations Joe and I started having, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And obviously any of the board members, we talked about this in various ways, but you were the first person I saw when Felton was like, who's going to talk?
Yeah, okay, I'll say a few things. One of the things I'm struck by, John, when you're speaking, and this is the paradox I think that the DPLA is characterized by or struggles with, is incredibly rich vision for what it promises to be, and a scarcity of resources to realize that rich vision, right? In other words, it's like every time I think about or hear about the underlying concept or the promise, I get excited and I want to figure out how to move it forward. And yet the pragmatics of doing this have been, and this is where our conversations have kind of been focused, have been limited by the fact that we have largely been, not strictly speaking, a volunteer organization, but an organization built on the backs of a lot of commitment to public good, but not a lot of resources in terms of dollars formally flowing to that. And I think we our big challenge is to figure out what the magic bullet is, what the magic path is around that impasse. And I think the resource we have is, goodwill and commitment from a lot of people, but the challenge continues to be, how to get to the really big, exciting things with that kind of infrastructure. And I wish I could say something that implied that I was getting closer to having an answer for you on this question, but our conversations have largely been around this fact that we've, over a decade roughly built something that, is founded on a really great vision, but that is always challenged by how to get to the next rung on the ladder. And that is the conversation we've had in the board. And I think I'll shut up in just a second, but I think one possibility here now over the next few months is that we do get the community at the table in a new way to think about that, maybe with a different kind of energy and a different sense of, what is 2023 versus what was 2011, and what do we need to do now, and what's different now, right? Because I think that's one of the big elements in the environment, is it's not the same moment. So what are we called to do in this different moment, and what does that mean for how the community engages? So those are my quick thoughts.
That's really helpful. Not coincidentally, right, as we're designing this visioning process, that's exactly some of the framing and things about that I think is going to undergird it and drive it and be part of the output, right? I think that's my suggestion of that, creating a process like that in part is a reflection that left to our own devices, we're not going to come to that. We can't really have that conversation, right, as part of our day-to-day work. We need sort of help and sort of the space to be able to take that inhale and a blank piece of paper and have a set of conversations both with existing partners and others to sort of imagine that.
Yeah. I think that was a great point from Joe for us to kind of either continue the conversation or end our conversation today. We knew this wasn't going to be a long meeting because we're still working on what this visioning process looks like. But we wanted to make sure that we give anyone in the network an opportunity to provide their thoughts or bring us questions that might be helpful for us. Well, I think, John, you explained it so well that everybody's happy.
Man, there's still a lot to figure out, and we're going to be calling on you to help us figure it out. As Felton said at the outset, I think, the next time you hear from us, I hope to be able to share both sort of a proposed structure and plan and timeline for taking on this visioning process, and also to be able to announce the funding, which it looks like it'll be multiple sources of funding that's going to enable that work. So Greg Colati, who I just had breakfast with a couple of weeks ago, just asked a very challenging question. And I don't know, Greg, if you want the mic to ask this question, but after a compliment, he did a little compliment sandwich. We do a great job of aggregating content, but the content is at risk, very much at risk. How do we ensure that content in the DPLA persists over time? Greg, I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that with the microphone in the time we've got, or if anyone on the board wants to, I think it's I don't have any answer to that because I think it's a really good question. And maybe that's exactly the type of question that I think we should be on the table for this process.
And I don't, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay. So there's almost 50 million objects in the DPLA. Most of them come from aggregators who aggregate content, but have no control over the persistence of that content over time. And I don't know if that's DPLA's mission or interest. Should they get into that sort of thing and be not only the digital public library of America, but the digital stacks of America? That would be a huge commitment and change, but I don't know who else is doing it. And maybe the hubs can start working at the hub level. Maybe it's too big at the national level. Maybe we can start small. I don't know, but I know a lot of people who use the DPLA all the time. And it would really be a shame if all this work we did started to just disappear in little bits and chunks. No answer, just a question.
That I also don't have an answer for it, and I'm looking. I don't want to put her on the spot, but I know someone who's thought a lot about that is on our board, which is Elaine. Elaine, I don't know if you want the mic passed to you. I don't expect you to have an answer for that either, but all these things that we're talking about is stuff that you and I've also talked about. So I didn't want to. You would had leapfrog Joe in my Facebook. So I wanted to pass it to you.
No problem. I mean, I think I can really just add to what Joe was saying, which is, the world is just a very different place than when DPLA was started. And it really is up to us to reimagine, what DPLA is in a world of artificial intelligence, in a world of where libraries, research libraries in particular, are building collections in a very different kind of way. The whole scholarly ecosystem has changed. The way we buy books, it's just everything has changed. The market has changed. The way we, the economics of hiring staff and the technology. All these things are just so different. And I just have to keep going back to that we really have to think about the mission and what does that mean in today's world. And I just think, if you had the opportunity to do it today, it will look very different. And building a movement like this on the backs of the coalition of the willing is also, it's a precarious situation to be in. And I think that's also part of, the changing world that we live in. And so I think there's a great opportunity to rethink what the value is and the impact and relevance in today's world, and then just, basically start over with those kinds of questions.
I think that's the best answer we're gonna get there, Mr. Bracken.
That was pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, as we exit out, I mean, the two things I would underline is like the great opportunity we have is to take on those questions with a set of stakeholders and actors across the country, right, including funders, not coincidentally, who are passionate and excited to take on those questions with us. And so I'm really appreciative, as we alluded at the beginning, we thought we could have, because it's summertime, we thought we'd have a small enough room that we could just go around the table and all introduce ourselves. But I think we almost had 100% from the folks who registered attendant. So on a July Monday. So I appreciate all of you that are here, and I'm excited to be able to begin to build out a process and a structure for us to take on these questions that we're talking about today.
Bob Darton has his hand raised again. John, if you want to get a final thought from him.
That sounds like a great way to bring it in for a landing. Unless it's his hand raised from Bob, unless it's from the last time.
I had taken it down, so I think it's new. Oh, perhaps a false alarm.
And Greg added a second question there, which is, I think, again, one that I think is the role of this visioning process for is what role will DPLA play in the preservation? Is it something we should be doing, or something we should be advocating on the local, in the local communities? But again, I think local communities are struggling to be able to do this work because of all of the reasons that Elaine mentioned earlier. So again, it's an opportunity for us to look at the landscape and see what the landscape looks like in 2023 and beyond as compared to 2011. Well, we want to thank everyone for joining us today. As John said, we pretty much got everybody who signed up to join us, so we appreciate all of that. We look forward to seeing you next time in our next board meeting, and certainly if you have an opportunity to join us for Jennifer Palka, all the information for her book talk is in the chat. I've seen Jennifer speak. She's a great speaker, so I think it'll be very, very entertaining. So if you want that opportunity, please do join us at DPLA's event. With that, thank you all and have a good day.